Hello, my name is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 270 of Gaming with Grief, and I'm going to talk about how the podcast is going to change. So, if you like this video or like this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube or podcast services like Apple iTunes, the Amazon Music, Spotify, any places where you can find podcasts. It's Gaming with Grief, and we're going to talk about how the podcast is going to change. Hey, I'm back. What a long time that I took away for the intro. Anyway, to be honest, I've done a lot of soul searching, and let me just be very plain. The podcast isn't having the impact that I want it to have. Now, this isn't a thing where I think I'm going to make millions of dollars off a weekly podcast. But, it's the fact that the views are very low. And I don't, I haven't even got an email or a comment for my videos. And it's been 5 years of doing the podcast. This is episode 270. And I just had a big kind of sit down think over the weekend. And to be clear, the podcast isn't going away, but I'm going to talk about some things that some changes I want to make to the podcast. One, the podcast will now be monthly. I think that was because what happened was every time I would sit down to do a pod or play a game, I try not to read reviews so that way I can come into the game fresh. And what would happen sometimes is I would spend all week playing a 10 or 20 hour game because I have a day job. And at the end of that time, there was really no clear thesis of grief, or maybe on a whim I played a game because I thought, well, these has interesting trappings, maybe it'll say something or articulate something different about grief, and the game wouldn't. A game that comes to mind is Control. Now, everybody who's played Control will be like, of course that doesn't have to do with grief. But Jesse McFadden, the lead character of the game and the future chief of the Bureau of Control, has, I think it's Polaris, which is like this entity in her head that talks to her. Well, that's psychosis, right? If you hear voices in your head, that's what I would think would be psychosis. Her brother had abilities and was taken, I want to say Darren. Anyway, her brother was taken very young and experimented on. That's kidnapping. Her brother probably also has PTSD. Now, I'm not saying they have to make the whole game based on this, but in my opinion, they really didn't touch on that. And I was thinking about it when I was playing, and I think I mentioned this in my review. Trench, the past leader of the Federal Bureau of Control, kills himself, which apparently is what happens when you're retire from the Bureau of Control, or he was under the control of something. That's not mentioned, that's messed up. I think what it is, I always have good intentions. I want to sit down and play a game and give it its fair due. But when you only have a week and you sit down and say, one, the idea I have of the game or what I'm hearing about the game is usually what I start. Does this sound like something that I could review for the pod? And by the time I get to the end of it, because I have such a narrow purview for how I look at games, if people don't know, I'm just going to share this. I think I take too long to share this, but between 2016 and 2020, many people in my life that I cared about died. My father was the first to pass away in 2016. My wife then was pregnant. We were expecting our first kid. It was a girl, and she miscarried about 11 weeks in. So that was terrible. Then after that, my mother got ill, and what we found out had liver failure and got sepsis and died within about 4 days. So within about 18 months, both my parents passed away, and the miscarriage of our first expected child. My wife and I then, she got pregnant again, this time with Adam, a boy. He was going to be born, I want to say, in January 2018. And he was born prematurely, and he died shortly after he was born. So that was terrible. Then after that, my wife and I tried again to get pregnant, and I believe it was like a year later with Jacob. And she miscarried at about the 20-week mark. And what made it really rough about that is not only has all this stuff happened, but she got her cerclage, which means we tried to take precautions where they actually stitch up part of the uterus, the way I understand it. And, I know anatomy, but doctors use very technical terms, and then they try to be very simple. And the doctor was a high-risk doctor that did the procedure, so we were very excited. Hey, they told my wife and I, hey, your wife may have to have bed rest, but in the end, it'll work out because this is the safest way to make sure you're at high risk, that nothing happens to the baby. Well, something happened to the baby, and I kid you not, I want to say it's like 2019. Yeah, because Adam would have been born in 2019 in January, but he everything's a blur when it's 2 a.m. But anyway, Jacob was born, and she miscarried on the April Fool's weekend. Not funny. So with that was kind of like 2019. And then at the end of 2019, that was the end of 2018. 2019, a very close friend of mine, Ben Nelson, passed away. I want to say in April of 2019. We actually had another podcast together called Second Rate Fellows. I've played some of those episodes in the past, like when I've talked about Breath of the Wild, because Ben and I talked about it when it came out. I gave him my Switch when the Switch came out, and we talked about it. And I finally did my over review of Breath of the Wild. I want to say it was episode 119, but it was an early-ish episode, and I just played Ben's voice at the end of the episode because I miss Ben a lot. He had glioblastoma and he died, and then just the total, cherry on top of the death cake was our cat died. An older elderly cat just passed away, and she passed away at home. We have remains here with little Pop Mark. But after all that, like everybody, you do a little soul searching. My wife and I went to couples therapy, which I'm very grateful for. Shout out to my therapist, Bill. Thank you so much. I've talked about it on the pod before. But I when I started playing games after that, through it, and I talked about that during different episodes, like Breath of the Wild I played it. My mom was in the hospital going through stuff when I was playing it. And it was actually relaxing because I like everybody with big open world games, sometimes you bounce off, but you come back. And I did that with Breath of the Wild a lot. So when my mom was sick, I know the game came out in 2017, but in 2018 when I was playing the game, it was kind of very relaxing and meditative. And I talked about that in the episode when I reviewed the game. Anyway, games have meant a lot to me. It makes me reflect on different things. And one of those things is when a game brings up grief, death, or dying, and you start paying more attention to it. And I'm being presumptuous, but I would imagine if you had a terminal disease like cancer, and somebody in a video game says, "Oh, I have cancer, and this is my type of cancer," you would probably pay a little bit more attention because you have you have knowledge or experience with that. So then it kind of matches up with your own feelings, or maybe it doesn't. And that's kind of what the pod is to not gatekeep grief, but I always say all the time, you want someone to articulate, or a developer or a creator to articulate a new aspect of grief, or even take a trope and spin it in a new way to say this is a great way to represent grief, dying, thoughts of death, and things like that. And I was talking with my friend about this, and if anybody's watched the channel, the few of you out there, I really like the game that came out earlier this year, Banisher's Ghost of New Eden. What I like about it is that it seemed to be unabashedly about grief. You can go back and listen to that episode. I want to say that's like episode 250, but it's Banisher's Ghost of New Eden. You can check that out. But I like it because people really have to process what they've gone through. Not only are you dealing with ghosts and trying to unravel that, but you're also trying to be very pragmatic about tell me what happened, and they're kind of doing like a moral inventory of what's going on, and like I enjoy that kind of thoughtfulness, and the writers did an amazing job. Well, anyway, I was talking to my friend, and I said, here's a game that I really like, and here's a review that I really think I did a good job at. Again, it was weekly. I sent it to him, and I was like, well, you know what, I'm going to watch a few minutes of this and to see how the audio quality was, because when I listened to it, it sounded good. I edited it. I, watched it back, made some different cuts, published it. But it began, because it was weekly, it was a little bit shorter. It was like maybe 20 minutes, which is one of my longer reviews. But right at the point when one of the characters is talking about grief, I messed it up and screwed up the edit. And I think some of that had to do with, yes, I looked back at my work and tried to give myself time. But some of it is because it is a weekly schedule, and I'm trying to get the deadline, and I have to think to myself, even when I'm editing the episode, what's next? You have 5 days to do the next thing and get it done. And there's some games, and I'm going to be very clear. I always said like I've had white whales, but I haven't really said what they are. Maybe I had, it was so long ago I don't remember, because this is episode 270. There's 2 white whale games that I want to review, and I will say I'm working towards reviewing, and I'll tell you what they are, because I like being honest. One of them is Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. I started replaying it. There are several tropes of grief in the beginning of that game, but I wanted to see how they present them, and if they say something new or unique about them. Just because you're using a trope or a stereotype to present something doesn't mean you can't spin it in a unique way and say something kind of profound. And I want to see if Ni no Kuni was doing that. The other game that is kind of my white whale is Death Stranding. Now, if you're watching this, Death Stranding is a strange game to me, because even as the promotional material was coming out, and there was weird trailers with, believe someone called Mama, and there was like a ghost baby suckling on her. My wife was watching this material with me because she likes games as well, and she was like, what is this? My wife wasn't offended or thought it was weird, but to me also with Death Stranding, the idea of carrying around a fetus with you in amniotic fluid and saying like, oh, it's a tool, and then in the very beginning of the game you do a mission with the BB, I believe, the baby, and something happens, you bring it back to base, and someone says, hey, it's faulty, just burn it. And having cremated children before and scattering ashes, it seems strange to me. It kind of reminds me initially, now again, they could swing around and say something, but initially it reminded me of things I would write when I was young that were edgy, but one, needed an editor, and two, were edgy for edgy's sake. And there was a lot more things in that game that were edgy. Like everybody always cried. In the beginning, Sam Bridges has to cremate his mother, which I have done. And it didn't feel, I don't know, but it's a 60-hour game. So I didn't want to, I've done early impressions on that. You can go back and look at the channel. But I didn't want to be too critical of it because I'm like, hey, I haven't played this whole thing. But again, having a day job and doing everything weekly, I suppose I could work, 12 hours a day trying to do this. But I wake up at like 3 in the morning to go to work. And again, I have a day job. And it's been a lighter year this year. I've only usually worked 8 to 9 hours a day, which is pretty unique for me, and very little Saturdays. But at the same time, you want to give something its due, and you want to have time to reflect. Most people that I enjoy their reviews on regular games usually take probably a day or two to like collect their thoughts and write a review if they have that time. If they don't, I think the review would suffer. And so I don't want the reviews to suffer, and I think they are. And shout out to Avin Carroll, who is the co-host of The Grief of Politics with me that comes out every month. We kind of chatted about this because he is also, well, I don't want to say anything he's doing, but he was a really good sounding board for me about what to do next and like what steps to take next and like a path forward. And it seemed pretty doable. So again, the podcast is going to be monthly. And looking at the calendar, it's going to be the 28th of every month because every month has a 28 in it. Every month does not have a 31, whatever. And that way it'll keep it, whatever. Again, the podcast is not going away. It's just slowing down a bit. But I hope to give you better reviews. This week will obviously be a normal episode. Next week will be a normal episode. Basically, it's just an interview. I'm saying this right now. I'm just telling you ahead of time. It's all planned. Hopefully, everything will work correctly. But it's a hopeful interview with a relative of mine who loves Final Fantasy. And I've actually been thinking about this a lot because I like Final Fantasy. But I played 70 hours of Final Fantasy 14. I'm still in the main thing. I haven't even got to Heavensward yet. I've talked about him on the pod, the Encyclopedia Eorzea, like the volumes. They look amazing. They present the lore in a great way. And I played the Final Fantasy 16 demo, but I am not a big JRPG person, to each their own. It's just not really what I look to, but that, of course, is changing because I'm playing Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch. I may come out of it and be like, this is it, man. I'm doing this. This is my whole life now. I'm going to play these games. But what I want him to do and what I'm going to talk to Tim about is, one, his fandom of Final Fantasy. And he told me very clearly, I'm not an expert, but I love Final Fantasy, my favorite series. So, one, I want him to sell me on it. And two, I probably just want to ask him some general questions about, like, what is going on with Final Fantasy? If you have a Chocobo, does that make a Final Fantasy game? I don't know. It seems like that seems to be kind of a staple. Anyway, without getting too much into the interview that I'm going to do next week that hasn't been recorded yet, we got it planned. It'll work out. So, to reiterate, the podcast is not going away. It is just going to be monthly. I have enjoyed the small interactions I've had with the few comments I've got on my videos. I'll be honest, most of them have been robots, which, just bots farm my video for views. I didn't know what to think about that, but, it is what it is. I don't know if I can do anything about it. So, have a good time, robots. Knock yourself out. I'm starting to work out more, which is kind of like on the side. That makes me feel a little bit better. So this morning I'm going to go walk with my wife. We're going to go to a big golf course with a track around it, area, like walking area, with hills and everything. So it'll be pretty great. So yes, again, monthly, the 20th of each month. This week is a normal episode. Next week is a normal episode. And then after that, the next episode will be August 28th. And I think what I'm going to do is make good on Banisher's Ghost of New Eden, because I could do a much better job of articulating what I think this game says about grief and maybe not mess up the edit this time. And there was games, again, that meant a lot to me, and shout out to Avin for pointing this out. There's games that meant a lot to me that because of the weekly thing, I couldn't spend the time I wanted to do what I wanted to do, because most of these games are like 20 hours long, So I just want to be better and spend more time and making a better product. So instead of about quantity, which I always used to think about that, like, man, look how many episodes I have. But most of my episodes are 8 to 10 minutes long, which is fine. Most reviews are, and my reviews were. But when I listen to some of them, and I have gone back, I'm like, this could have been a whole section. This one line that the person said, or the line that I said. And I don't have time to make it better. So I want to make the podcast better for everybody. And I'm going to do that starting on August 28th. So don't freak out if you don't see the podcast every week. I know there's only a few of you, but it'll be fewer and hopefully better. So, hopefully here's to 270 more episodes of the pod. If everybody has liked and subscribed and watches and listens to this, thank you so much. And, I'll keep going. So have a good week. I will talk to you guys next week, but after that, I won't talk to you guys again for a month. Be safe. If somebody in your life is maybe not doing so well, if you can do it emotionally, talk to them or reach out to an old friend or something. Maybe somebody you're like, man, I really need to call that person and see how they're doing. So with that, I'll let you guys go, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.